Hello, my name is Mike Sutton. I'm a criminologist and I want to talk to you about my latest book published by Curtis Press. Here it is. It's called Science Fraud and the subtitle is Darwin's Plagiarism of Patrick Matthews' Theory. There's a lot of information in this book and a lot of new data which debunks a number of myths we've been told about the discovery of the theory of evolution by natural selection, and it seriously questions the honesty and integrity of Charles Darwin and those who support Charles Darwin as an icon of science today. These are shocking findings, and I'm sure, as it should be, your sceptical radar and antennae are working overtime right now as I'm speaking. But so, in order to tweak your curiosity with verifiable empirical facts, all of which underpin history and science, let me begin. In 2013, I wanted to find out whether or not Charles Darwin really did coin the phrase natural selection. Turns out he never. Others got there before him. To be fair to Darwin, I wanted to look at how he'd used the term. And Darwin often used it in the context of what he called the process of natural selection. That's very important because the theory of evolution by natural selection is all about process. Without natural selection being a process of nature, it leaves room for people to argue for divine intervention by a supernatural being who lives in the sky or whatever. Okay, so Darwin was first with that term, process of natural selection, but it wouldn't be right to stop there. I looked at whether there was any other grammatically correct equivalent usage of the same four words, and there's only one. It is natural process of selection. I entered that term into Google's library of millions of scanned books and articles, and it turns out that somebody else was the first person to use that term, apparently. And that was Patrick Matthew in 1831. Didn't know who he was then. I looked at who was apparently first to be second with it, a guy called Robert Chambers. Never heard of him. Looked him up. He's famous in the Darwin literature for someone who put evolution in the air with a book called The Vestiges of Creation. Okay, didn't leave it there. Next thing, had Chambers ever cited Matthew? Yes, in 1832. And later he cited Matthew's second book, Emigration Fields. This was the beginning of a long journey using big data analysis to look at who had cited Matthew's book before Darwin and Wallace claimed to have originated the theory independently. And what did Matthew do in 1859 after The Origin of Species had been published? Believe me, he fought for his theory to his dying day. There's a lot of mythology here. My book reveals 30 people, many of whom were naturalists, some of whom Darwin and Wallace said were their greatest influences, who have been newly discovered to have read and cited Matthew's book in the literature before Darwin or Wallace put a pen to paper on the subject. Read Science Fraud, Darwin's Plagiarism of Patrick Matthews' Theory, to get these independently verifiable empirical facts. If it didn't happen, and it didn't happen that no one read Matthew's book as we've all been told, it's not history. Logically it follows if it did happen, it is history. And it did happen that Matthew's book was read by other naturalists. And it did happen that Darwin and Wallace had said that the same people that I discovered as cited Matthew's book were their greatest influences. That's empirical data. Empirical data underlines science. Scientists might argue about what empirical data means, but what they do is they agree what the data means and then they discuss it. Enjoy my book.